Hi, this is Bennett. Can you hear me? Because I can't.
Hi, Bernard. Yeah, hi,
Hi.
Bernard. Sorry, I was talking on mute. How are you?
I'm fine. I have a bit of issues with my audio because I need to get that on the headphones, but
Okay. I would wait.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so that's the one. Yes. Okay, we will see how that works out. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Tired, but sort of I'm curious to sort of see or hear what you've been able to get as feedback from the Nephew session.
Yes, yes. I'm just joining from my system so that I can share my screen. Just give me a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Bernard, could you give me just 2 minutes? Someone is at the door knocking.
No problem, no problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, hi, Bernard. I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Keep you waiting for 2 minutes.
No problem.
Okay. Bala is also there. Hey, hi, Bala.
Hey.
Hi.
And congratulations, Bala, for winning the award for Nephew contribution.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Subhash. And thanks to all of you. You guys make me look good.
Is that a compliment? I'm not quite sure.
It is a compliment.
Yeah. Okay, let me share the screen.
Maybe traveling and all today. Maybe not much participation, I guess.
Yeah. So how was the event? Any it's like interesting thing you captured, Bala?
Yeah, I mean, quite a few interesting things. And basically, well, obviously, there was a lot of excitement. And there was a lot of talk about service assurance as well. And ORAN integration. I think, yeah, overall, I think people are happy with the way Nephew is kind of putting things together. So it's a very clean way and very organic way without much baggages. So the telco players were happy, but and so were the network function vendors and the platform vendors. So it's a few things, obviously with R2, right? We know what we are doing R2, but beyond R2, I think probably the other things such as how we play well with ORAN, how we actually bring the commercial solutions on board, and how we support some of the other things that we are doing, such as SDK and service assurance on board. I think those are the critical points that we need to figure out beyond R3.
Okay. Okay. So let's try to revisit the thing. What we presented and what input we got. So I kept as our agenda item. So I'm just opening it.
It is good to see Sandeep in person too.
Yeah.
You should have also traveled, buddy.
Yeah. Lot of company constraint.
I understand. Everybody
Yeah.
has that, I guess.
Yes.
Next time, yeah.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Okay. So Bernard, actually, we got some two interesting feedback during our presentation. So this particular slide got covered by Charles, and we were discussing around how we can identify multiple closed loop and how those closed loop would be addressed by the service assurance. So we we identified three closed loop here. So one where the operator directly works along with the NF and closest to the NF actually that closed loop. And another with the help of Nepio, we have the management cluster, the workload clusters, so the entire thing. And the furthermost one is our SMO, which works on the end-to-end orchestration or service assurance system, and it might be taking advantage of assurance system that we are building. So that was our thought. So actually, John actually brought up the another closed loop that would be the nearest one. So he brought one a term area. I think RARP, I guess. So that I need to look at closely. So that going to be the nearest one, and that will be like performing, I think, a nanosecond or some millisecond of delay. So it will be
it's the network
closest one.
function itself doing the assurance.
Yeah.
Yes.
So with this thought, actually, we have the closed loop at a different level. So with this thought, one interesting thought brought by the Ravi. I guess it was Ravi. So we need to put assurance at the different levels, and also we also need to ensure that this different level of assurance would not cause a conflict while reconfiguring our package variant or reconfiguring anything on the NF. So we need to ensure that that assurance part it should not be overlapping or conflicting. So this was the one input, and another interesting thought came up by comparing it with ORAN architecture. So it looks a little similar to how we have positioned non-arteric, near-arteric, and finally ODU and OCU.
Oh, Subhash, just a second here.
Yeah.
Let's stop for that. I'm sorry if I interrupted you, but I want to make sure we understand something here, right? And John made it, and I don't know if you caught, John made this comment. If you notice, you have the three loops, right? One of the things
Right.
that we have to do, the first thing that we have to do is we have to determine the performance in terms of how what's the amount of time that that is expected that those closed loops can operate in the shortest amount of time. You know, in the 3GPP world, they've got like 5 milliseconds, whatever, all the way up. So for each of these loops, we have to understand that if you want time frames below a certain level, millisecond, nanosecond, second, minute, I don't care, days, we need to make sure that they know that this loop isn't appropriate, because the point that John made said, if you're dealing with Kubernetes APIs and infrastructure, you're dealing in the seconds at best, right? And so stuff like the near real-time brick, which deals with milliseconds, right, would not be appropriate to be used in these loops. So the first thing was the request was to identify what the time constraints are, or the architectural time constraints are for these types of loops, right? And I just didn't want to, because I don't think you can do the near real-time REC, right, with the loops that you're currently looking for within the architecture, or that you currently established in the architecture. That was the point that I wanted to make, right? So I think first you say, what's the granularity of the loop, right, in terms of performance time, that is expected, right? And then if I have something that's lower than that, I can't use it at that layer, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, Tim. I
Sure.
think, Tim, if I understand it correctly, so we are looking for the use cases, what time constant it can bear it, right? In some use cases, it is perfectly fine that we are running somewhere further, and we could have certain delay in the scale of seconds or milliseconds. But certain use cases, those should be completely real time. So it should be a little closer, and in some use cases we need we need to have a time delay very minimal. It should look like it is running locally, right? So we need to take care about this kind of use cases, and based on that, we need to configure it, right? If I understand correctly.
Right. So your architecture, the comment was on your architecture, there's current time constraints that the loop can operate in. A lowest level, you're not going to get below this, right? And that's what John was trying to say. And I agree. So
Right.
we should talk about, for each of the three loops that you're talking about, what is the performance constraint that you're looking for, right? You know, at these levels, right?
Yeah.
That's
what I've understood is that Subhash mentioned that there would be a fourth loop, and basically the loop which would be handled without the operator approach, handled possibly by the network function itself.
Or that would, yeah, I would be different to say network function itself, but by some other mechanism, right? Because again, the near real-time REC may not. It probably isn't just network function. It's a framework, right? Some application layer framework.
Yeah, actually, this particular slide, we thought like we could identify different feedback mechanism, or the closed loop happening currently in the NPO. So with that thought, we have brought it. But yeah, it is very interesting that we could think around it also. It's like how we can deliver the requirement which are dependent on the time delay, and try to think around the assurance on with those time constraint. So that requirement, I think it's really interesting if you can think around.
I believe in addition there are sort of also other dimensions, such as sort of the scope of what is being controlled in this context. Yeah, that means, is it an individual network function? Is it sort of an aspect which might relate to sort of the combination of infrastructure and network function, etc. So that means sort of these loops are sort of extending the scope also from, if I look at the highest layer, up to the service aspects, whereas the lower elements would have a more narrower scope of what they would be controlling.
Right. I agree. Yes, we need to design in such a way that we can break down some top layer service assurance based on its requirement to some lower level closed loops or lower level granularity, so that we should think. Yeah. So this was the one point. Anything on this context actually you would like to cover, Tim? Is anything you have the thought?
Well, the first one was, so I had two concerns, right? You know, but that one was talking about observability, right? The framework,
right?
That it didn't allow for local workload cluster collection, but that's a different topic. You're talking about just loops, and I think it just starts off of the types of loops that we have, and what is the KPIs, performance KPIs, right? You can talk about capacity or performance KPIs for those different types of loops, right? And if there's a fourth loop that's just application layer looping, Is that in scope of Nepio to provide the appropriate implementation for it, right? Or is it going to be for the application? I think, you answer those 4 questions. What got me was when John said, "Hey, look, man, you're using operators, you're talking second land, right?" And I'm like going, okay, well, that takes near time Rick out of the out of the cell. So, which is fine. Just moves it to a category that's application layer, right?
Right. I totally agree. And the second observation, actually, I noted during the event, it was very interesting that there was a thought to bring an analogy between RIC architecture, or an alliance architecture and this closed loop architecture. So that comparison also gives another dimension. Is it something similar to over an architecture that we can visualize? So that question is also
So the ORAN architecture has I don't think you can use it directly, to be honest with you, but an ORAN architecture, just like the 3GPP, the 5G architecture, right? Has these, I expect the closer you get to the NF, the time is better, but you start moving yourself out, the time is more coarse, and the expectation of those are more coarse. And so what you've done here is that we just haven't given what the performance is, the expected, minimal performance requirement would be for those types of loops that you want to use within there. The question will be that says, okay, now I have a loop. The other question that I did not get out of this, is that there is really three things that you want to reconcile, right? I want to reconcile. Am I reconciling or performing the loop to correct the workload? Am I performing a loop to correct the cloud infrastructure itself, the controllers, and all the platform software, right? Am I have a loop that assure, or am I also trying to get, and I didn't get this from there, right? I couldn't get the question answered. Am I also trying to provide tools, enabling characteristics for an application layer to use these reconciliations by performing the API? So at the NF application layer itself, for example, I might have some characteristics of a DU, if you're talking about a RAN, or an AMF, right? That I have KPIs of, that I can use the service assurance framework of Nepio in order to reconcile the application APIs, right? Layer API or KPIs, sorry. So that wasn't clear either, right? And if it is, what are the constraints of using the Nepio service assurance framework for an application layer KPI reconciliation? You see what I'm saying? So a DU, I always look at it this way. It says, so if I have a KPI that says I have a DU that supports this many cells per, I want to do 400 megahertz of bandwidth per cell, right? You notice I say capacity per cell, right? Or if you're talking about an SMF, right, you might be saying, I want to be able to support, or UPF, I want to support bandwidth, 500 megabits per user, as part of a capacity thing or something like that, right? If those KPIs are part of that framework, then these are application layer KPIs. And what are the constraints of the framework with respect to those application layer KPIs? You see them, Bernard, am I making sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. What I believe is that we need to a little bit try to understand what we regard to be the intent being sort of handed over to the Nepio framework. Because if I've got a sort of a high level intent of wanting, for instance, to support, let's say, user experience related KPIs, then the parameter space which I could potentially make use of in order to support that might be large. Yeah, that means I've got a sort of a high-level intent description, and I might have many, many options of how I could potentially fulfill that. And when I'm now sort of talking about this closed loop service assurance part, we could sort of try to investigate which of the parameter options would most successfully support this high-level intent. If the intent, on the other hand, is very, very specific, so just imagine that you would say, I want to have sort of exactly one AMF pod sort of handling the traffic, then sort of the service assurance cannot really do very much in order to, for instance, scale out the capabilities if the intent is already defined on such a low level. And my impression is that as a result of these service assurance mechanisms, basically we would sort of refine or sort of update the intent which has been originally handed over as input to the Nephew process. And the question is, what kind of options do I have when I sort of express that intent for the next cycle? Was that confusing or?
Yeah, I looked at it from a similar type of thing, but it said, but I tried to abstract it out. I said, so
Yes,
if I have a KPI, right, and that KPI is documented as part of an intent for an application layer workload, you know, as I said, you know, bandwidth per cell or bandwidth per user, whatever that is, you know, that's application layer.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we say, okay, for a particular KPI, am I going to rely upon the Nephew service assurance framework in order to reconcile that KPI? Do I delegate it to the framework, right? And then have all that stuff that goes through there. So the requirement would be, and I see Wim has joined too, which is good. Do we want to have the capability for application layer KPIs, related KPIs, to delegate the reconciliation of those KPIs to the service assurance, the Nephew service assurance framework? I think we do. I think we want to have that capability because if the framework can do it, then there isn't necessarily.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. But what we need to then try to understand is sort of that these types of specifications are not somehow sort of distributed all over the CRDs, but somehow sort of made available in a way where we can easily pick up that information and say, oh, this information is actually dedicated and should be used for service assurance procedures. Yeah. Because otherwise I've got, again, sort of these thousands of parameters where they all might be of relevance, and trying to then try to write an operator or any kind of functionality, which would then sort of try to determine for specific resource types where to find these service assurance related aspects would be very tedious.
Right. Bernard, I also would like to ask one small query. So what approach we need to take? Should we take a bottom to up or up to bottom? Because what I mean to say, if we define our intent, and let's say it contains all the KPI related parameters and arguments, what we need to do it, and it is delivered, and those details is delivered from some higher layer. Then again we will try to configure those NF. So it is already happening, right? I think we are trying to focus on the other direction where we need to collect NF details from workload cluster, and based on that we need to do certain things, or we need to take certain action to maintain the QoS or its performance. And I think how to achieve those performance, or how to take any rectification step, that detail actually we will receive from the higher level or end user, right? And also I think we need to get some information from the NF vendor or the package creator who might understand how to scale the NF and the details about the NF, how to deal with it. So I think those information will get it right from. So that's why I'm calling it as a bottom up approach instead of top to bottom. Am I right, or am I understanding a little going in different direction?
So I had a slightly different angle on this topic. My thoughts were here that we've now got a forward sort of looking process in the sense of I'm specifying intent. Nephew takes care of sort of hydrating that information so that it can be actually deployed to the API, and the API then takes care of setting up the appropriate resources. And the service assurance part is now stepping in as a second sort of feedback process, which then says, okay, there's an intent, there are certain aspects which I need to monitor, observe, and they should potentially also be sort of evaluated, correlated, and if certain criteria are met, they should also trigger certain policies. So I was trying to sort of structure this closed loop process and say, what are the specific functional steps which need to be sort of handled in this process, and then first make sure that we have a good understanding of these steps, what kind of sort of service or capability they would provide, and we could then ask sort of how would, for instance, the Nephew process support those individual steps, and then we could of course apply that to sort of an application level type of service assurance scenario. Or we could apply that to a simple scaling out scenario where, for instance, something else apart from CPU load might have to be monitored to then sort of trigger scale out procedures.
Right.
So I was just sort of thinking that it would be great if we could sort of try to say which are the functional elements of those loops and then apply them to the various scopes which we would have in mind. And ask ourselves, how would Nephew support that?
Yeah, so so in this direction, so the service assurance intent that we receive, so that we are going to receive as at the time of deployment itself, or it will be like it is for the D2 activity, right? So would it be that intent will be described later part of the deployment as a second stage? It would become as come within the same package, that intent, and then we'll try to do it. What exactly?
That's an implementation option. Yes, of course, you can do that in various different manners. But my real proposal is here: let's try to first make sure that we have all the functional steps in mind. Say we need to be able to collect appropriate information. Yeah, how do you know which information in which manner, which tools should be supporting that? Yeah. And we could put that either directly into the CRDs, which we're already rolling out, or we could have a second phase where we say on top of what we've already been deploying, we've got additional information of how we want to sort of structure service assurance. Yeah. And but for me, it's important. First, let's try to list the functional aspects of a closed loop approach here for service assurance. We talk about observability as first step. I believe we all agreed upon that. This was the first thing, and we tried to see how would Nephew potentially help us here in sort of structuring and setting up observability after the solution has been rolled out.
Okay.
Yeah, Wim, I agree with you regarding this autoscaler part, but I was just sort of saying there could be some kind of sort of complex calculation which needs potentially also some kind of configuration of external resource, which is not so easy to achieve. So I was just wanting to put that into the framework so that we don't have sort of situations where we are wondering why sort of a control loop is kicking in and we're not aware of that. Yeah, so I would rather want to have a mechanism where these solutions are somehow visible to us so that we're not sort of trying to change something and sort of constantly there's this hidden function which is then sort of reverting the changes back again.
Okay.
So Banaria, sorry, the auto scaler is configurable, huh? So you decide how it works.
Yeah. So,
it
no, but
has that
what I'm saying here is sort of from a control perspective, yeah, you would want to know when it's kicking in. And if we're looking at all those various loops, yeah, so if there is some kind of hidden separate process which is also then interfering here, it should be somehow integrated and visible to this scenario so that we're not wondering why a certain control loop is not working. Yeah, that's the only comment which I wanted to make. So I agree with you that autoscale has all these functionalities. You can be very flexible with that, but it should sort of somehow be part of this service assurance mechanism to say, yes, we know that there's overload and this part is already kicking into sort of make sure that the appropriate resources are available, etc.
Okay. So any comments, or shall we move on our next topic?
I would have a comment. How do we capture the considerations here? So what I don't want to have is that we discuss and then the information is somehow lost. So we should try to sort of then either give it as a task that Subhashu, you maybe sort of try to document that. But I would like to sort of make sure that sort of we're not losing this type of conclusion which we are trying to derive out of these discussions here.
Oh, okay. Maybe we will directly capture here in our agenda item. So I'll try to capture it here so that everyone we agreed on this. Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll try to capture it here. So, so could you summarize actually, Bernard? I'll just take all our conclusion here. So, what exactly?
So we had this sort of we need to pay attention to those near real-time scenarios where we might have to have a sort of the lowest level loop being capable of handling sort of nanosecond, microsecond type of scenarios, as an addition to the picture which you've shown before.
Yeah. It is okay.
We were talking, I believe, Tim, you mentioned these three types of scenarios related to the various layers and up to the application KPI layer. If you could repeat that from your perspective. I believe, Tim, you mentioned that. Is that correct?
Could you please help us to capture your thoughts? Tim, are you around? Okay. Maybe I'll check offline with the team and try to put his thoughts here. Okay.
Yes. And the last point which I wanted to mention was simply that we should try to structure the closed loop service assurance part and decompose it into individual functional blocks.
Okay. Decompose.
Decompose the service assurance loop into functional elements. First element being observability.
Okay.
Yeah. Second was sort of analysis. Third was sort of triggering of policies.
Okay.
As a first draft configuration here.
Okay, sure. I think we all agree with this point, right? Or any comments? We'll try to capture it here. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Bernard, I have one point here. So, now we are talking about some different topics. So, do you think it will affect our scope for service assurance? Do we need to capture it in our goals for workgroup 5? I think we just talk about the service assurance, so if we talk about the closed loop and the time sensitivity, so I think that will give one perspective to the people, like what we are trying to achieve it as part of this working group. So maybe we should also modify it. Right?
Yes, I'm not quite sure if these lowest level type of service assurance procedures would be something which Nephew would really control.
Okay.
For me, that's an open question. But from my perspective, I want to have a consistent way of how we provision our services or network functions, infrastructure, etc., contributing to the services, and how we sort of support service assurance here. Because I don't want to have two different processes, one process defining the network solution, and the other process totally independent from that, trying to define sort of how we do service assurance on that, on top of that, because we would have overlapping information which could lead to misconfigurations and misinterpretations of data. And so therefore, ideally, Nephew should try to come up with a consistent view of how it supports both the provisioning part as well as the service assurance part.
Okay. Okay. Yes. And are we thinking that still we need to redefine our scope or no? Just wanted to understand. So this part, yes or no, if you can say.
I must admit, I do not know if we've got defined a scope for work group 5 properly. So therefore, I would say yes, we should do that. But yeah.
Okay. Okay. So any comments from folks, or anything need to be modified or captured correctly? Okay.
So one question to both. Sorry, I was slightly off this topic.
No problem.
So in this particular closed loop automation that we're talking about, one thing I was interested is are we providing, let's say we have a management cluster and then we have workload deployed on workload clusters. It could be edge, far edge, regional, or whatever. So in this particular model, are we providing any kind of autonomy to the edge clusters themselves so that any kind of reconciliation, I know in some cases, obviously it has to come from above the OSS layers or some other orchestration systems, but there are opportunities for the autonomy at the workload cluster level itself, where it can analyze the data and do it. Are we considering any of that? You may have. I might have just missed it. That's why I wanted to ask the question.
I think, Bernard, could I take this chance to express my thought actually? What
Sure.
I think. Okay. So what I was thinking, the assurance system should as a part of the rectification step, it will create a policy. So might people differ on this opinion, but yeah, just I'm putting my thoughts. So we'll prepare the policies, and policies would be configured on the workload cluster. And also we know that policy would have the different meaning at different level, and also it is applicable in a different level. So here I'm just talking about in a workload cluster, when we push the policies, and policies, I think that will help you to take a local decision. So that will also also help you to work with the closest level of the loop. So that is also one possibility, I feel. And still it is a very much debatable how we would realize the policies. Is it going to be some existing open source project like OPA, or it could be CubeArmor with those help, or we need to again we need to have another operator at the workload cluster, and that will help us to realize that policy. So that question is still, it is open and debatable. So that is my understanding.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much.
Any comments, comments, Bala, on this thought? It will help us to actually move forward.
Yeah.
What do you
That
think?
too, that again, also sort of, it's another dimension, sort of, which Bala was mentioning. The question is, in which context would, for instance, those observability aspects, the analysis aspects, and the execution aspects be hosted? That means we could, for instance, think of sort of creating sidecars for each pod, which would sort of have a certain set of logic here. We could have this logic being part of the operators and then sort of making use of the capabilities of operators to sort of apply changes. We could have those operators being either hosted in the workload cluster or in the management cluster. Or we could even have this functionality being hosted as an external system, which would support that. So I got the impression that was also related to sort of what kind of deployment scenarios for those components which are needed for service assurance would we have in consideration?
Yeah. I feel that will help us to realize this as a technology independent, like based on what workload cluster using what kind of technology they can realize their action based on their technology, used technologies, right?
Yeah, thanks, Subhash. But no, I think basically conceptually it's covered. I think probably the how we want to do during the actual implementation, it's okay. It's something you can decide. Yeah, thank you.
And in the same direction, actually, I'm seeing one flavor in the observability also. I just opened the slide deck from the observability. So here they have three kind of three ways to collect those metrics. So one is sidecar. Here they are running the sidecar, and from there they are collecting some logs, and that may help us to again put some logic and try to execute our action. Or another dimension, they have the operator. So using that, they'll collect some kind of metrics, and it will send back to the management cluster. And another is Prometheus. They have the here scrapper, and that is and finally we will export the metrics back to the management cluster. So yeah, this ways I'm seeing it, and I think same way we can realize our actions also. Okay. Any thoughts? Any question, Bala?
No, thanks, Subhash. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We'll move further. Okay, so I'll just go back to our topics. So yeah, so the first topic was submit input that we discussed, and in the last meeting, actually, we were discussing around topology controller. So that could be our a base use case or first use case, we can call it. So that so some documentation I need to I need to collect actually from the Steven. So that still that part is pending. But yeah, I found some documentation here. So maybe I'll just try to show it. So I actually Wim could confirm it. It's like whether I'm referring the correct diagram that he was mentioning in the last meeting. Wim, is it the right diagram that you were referring? Wim, are you around?
Yeah, sorry, I'm doing two things at the same time. Can you say
No
that?
problem.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think Vim is integrating it to OpenAI to generate all these documents automatically.
Yeah. Yeah, Vim, actually, in our last meeting, actually, we had a discussion on the topology controller, right? How we could take advantage of topology controller and try to understand the service assurance. So that topic was there. So I just fished this document. I did not get a chance to connect with Steven, so maybe he might be. I'll try to connect up after this. But yeah, I found this particular documentation. I think this is the correct one, right? We were talking about the this documentation in the last
So I
meeting.
think you should have a look at what Steven presented in the summit on the observability. There are some changes with respect to this.
Yes. This is the one I was listening it. Is it the right? This one?
Yeah, so here there are some changes, but okay, this is also still in progress, right? So, but yeah, so this is what he presented basically.
Okay. Okay, so here we would be having our topology controller, so we can visualize this as service agentic service assurance operator or controller, which is receiving all these metrics based on the use case or interest, and then we need to provide some feedback mechanism, right? So that in that way we complete the closed loop.
And so
And yeah,
what you see here is basically the observability, right? It's how we basically get the information and where
right.
we basically store it, if you will. Now, I think for service assurance is basically how do you consume it, right? So that's the next step.
Right.
But this is kind of now this has not been finalized, so this is the current view. So this has to be discussed further. But this is the latest status as far as I can tell.
Okay. So yeah, some our assurance system will exactly fit here, right? It will be consuming the observability parameters.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, we need to still miss the invite Steven and try to understand what he has done on the NF topology, and we will try to check from there. So that was our second topic.
Yeah, I would like to comment here also a little bit.
Yeah.
There are thousand ways of how I can sort of implement observability. And I would like to see some kind of guidelines of sort of what is the Nephew approach in contrast to, I could, for instance, say sort of I don't do observability by Nephew. I could make use of external tools and do port mirroring or whatever, and I'll do everything over there. But there should be some guidelines of what we want to achieve with the Nephew approach, not simply coming up with one type of scenario and say this works somehow here, but sort of saying what are the building blocks of how Nephew would contribute to that approach. And these building blocks then, as also sort of described here, being the foundation for sort of our discussions then further on. So if that's still in the flow, that's fine. But I wouldn't want to sort of have a moving target where later on the other sort of design considerations sort of might disrupt the integration approach, which we would have then with the service assurance and the observability activities here.
So Bernard, if I understand correctly, so we are trying to create some kind of a pluggable architecture in the assurance system so that tomorrow either we consume from the observability, or if we could consume it from the external system or another mode of consuming it, right? So that will be based on our entire pluggable architecture that we would like to introduce in assurance.
Yeah.
Is it right to understand?
Currently it looks as though the only way of how service assurance would sort of interact with and get this information from the observability would be via the Nephew observability controller. But, right. And this is a design consideration, yeah? It could be that the people saying, why do I push that sort of via this bottleneck? Why don't I sort of make use of the metrics exporter and directly sort of feed it to the service assurance? I just wanted to make sure that these design considerations are very, very clear. And that based on that, okay, we say that's why we are now interfacing with the observability controller and with nothing else.
I see. Okay. Maybe I'll note it. This is important. Could you just repeat, Bernard, so that I'll correctly capture it?
Yeah. So the idea is that if the observability working group comes up with a design for their building blocks, as shown in the diagram before, they should sort of specify how sort of external systems would be able to interact with those building blocks.
Okay.
Yeah. And then based on that, we can derive sort of how would service assurance work together with the results of this work stream.
To use observability, or it should be from observability, streamlined from observability, right? Is it correct? So that service assurance could build on this. Is it right, or you need any modification?
Yeah, observability should describe how external systems can interface with their building blocks.
Okay, observability should describe how system created. Okay. Okay. Maybe I'll just correct it offline also by discussing with you. I think this is quite okay, right?
Mm. Yes.
Okay. I'll just discuss with you and I'll add it here. Okay. Okay. So I'll just go back to yeah, here. So I think we are okay with the topology controller and observability part discussion. And the user story, I had it here, user story and the design detail. And yeah, so sorry, I forgot to capture one more thing. I was just going through RFC that last time Wim had shared that input. So I read about I read about it, and I found some interesting things there that exactly captured by us, like impact analysis. So that was one quite interesting thing I observed. So we were talking about this impact analysis. So this document also talks about the impact analysis. So that we are thinking around our first user story, right? So that means we collect the status from the resource point of view and correlate our high level intent and the resource and try to understand how the intents are getting impacted. So so I'm just trying to correlate it. So the RFC also talks about impact analysis, and so our thoughts are in line. So that would be perfect. I would say first user stories to achieve it, in my opinion. So by any chance, anyone got to go through this RFC?
No, I still need to do that.
Yeah. So it was matching with our thoughts. So just wanted to mention that. So it would be good if we can try to summarize it and discuss it. Okay. So I'll just try to capture it later. And the user stories and the design details. So we need to work on it. User stories already we have given for already we are given on the impact analysis. So that we need to expand it further as part of our design details. So that part I still we need to do it. So here we I need a suggestion is how to move further, how to propose a design for it, implementation design. So maybe Bernard, if you can share your thoughts, so based on that we will build upon it. Maybe
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, but not now though, because we've only got 3 minutes time, but I can try to prepare something for next time.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Just I was asking any suggestion, is how approach it. So that means other could also involve in design preparation. So that suggestion only I was asking, not the details. So
My
anyone,
impression was that we already had started doing that, but
yes,
maybe we can refine it under the consideration of what has been done in the observability work stream to reflect that in a closer manner.
Okay, sure. Okay, so so let's conclude our today's meeting. So we got our conclusion captured here. So if you feel anything need to be corrected, please let us know. I'll also share this this document in our Slack chat, and yeah, definitely if we will prepare some initial document around it, and let's try to discuss from there. Okay. So any further queries or any suggestions?
Hey guys, just real quick. So I'm a bit lost, right? Maybe it's just me, but you know, if I look at what's in the Google Drive, right? There's a task force service assurance, right? That's there,
Right.
and it's got design considerations in it, right? It's got a PowerPoint or a presentation, right? And then it says, okay, I've got some high level intent, goes to API, blah blah blah. And then it's got some step one impact. Then it has a user story. And then step two, then there's a set of user stories. And so I'm just saying that that's there as a framework. I don't know what you planned on doing and building from that, right? So
Agreed.
okay. So that's my point, right? I know for for the ORAN integration piece, what I'm doing is I'm going through and describing what we're trying to do, and then talk about the epics, what you call user stories, but the epics of how that gets done, and then talk about after all that, right? Then talk about a deployment architecture that's valuable, and then hand off and identify the discrete user stories that would be applied to that deployment architecture, and then allow the developers at that point get blessing from the network architecture team, then allow the developers at that point to start filling out the design of their user stories, right? So anyway, that's what I plan on doing on that side. But I thought that was the start of what this was on your side. So
Okay. Sure.
All
yeah.
right.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you for your input. Okay. So we are just at the clock. Yeah. So let's try to meet next week, and we'll have some design related discussion to expand on our last topic. Okay. Sure. Thank you everyone for joining and sharing your inputs, and have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you. You as well. Bye bye.
Thanks, Subhash. Have a good night. Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye. Thank you.